I'm remembering a couple of stories Dad told me several years ago about Pa Tomberlin. Um, we were one day fishing in the Sweetwater Creek, and Dad began to tell me some stories about when he was a little boy. He said that he and his brothers and Pa Tomberlin, his dad, would be in the creek. They'd be cooning for fish. This is when you dive under the water and you stick your hand under roots and in holes in the ground and you pull out fish. And I asked Dad, I said, well, how good were you at that? He said, I wasn't that good. Said, but Daddy, Pa Tomberlin, said would come up out of the water with one fish in his mouth and one in each hand. He could, every time he dove into the water, he'd come back with the 3 fish. And that leads to another story. One day they were all seining. They had some nets in the Sweetwater Creek, and they were seining, and they thought they got the net hung on a stump. So Pa Tomberlin turned to Joe, who was a young teenager at the time, his son, my Uncle Joe, and said, Joe, jump down there and get that net unhung. Said about the time Joe dove in the creek, an alligator surfaced up out of the creek, and said Pa Tomberlin immediately jumped into the water, jumped on the back of the alligator, wrestled him to the shore, and another man came with a lighter knot and hit the gator so hard in the head that his eyeballs popped out of both sides of his head. That might seem like an outlandish story, but I've actually had 3 separate people tell me the identical story, so I know it's true. So Pa Tomberlin was certainly one of the great outdoorsmen there in South Georgia, and was very happy to wrestle that gator. And I asked Dad, well, what happened to the gator? And Daddy said they traded it for a mess of fish. So I guess that was a typical day in South Georgia back in the 1930s and 40s.